Naruto exclusive videos lemon come out on my boosty. You can watch and subscribe. Link in the description. Enjoy watching. Description: it's clear to everyone that Naruto can't live without adventures. But life after the war turned out in such a way that the famous blonde had to gather dust, gnawing on the granite of science, trampling her way to her dream. Boredom. True, it turned out that adventures also can't live without Naruto. Take this, sign for it. The quest called Fall on Tobirama's Head begins. And Tobirama also comes with Hashirama and Madara. Now it definitely won't be boring. Chapter 21. Senju Jr. was fed up with his brother's ideas. But Hashirama decided to add some heat and heated up the situation with Naruto assigned to him. Tobirama's head was already splitting due to the abundance of things to do in connection with the construction of Konoha, and now they had Uzumaki hanging around his neck. She can't go on missions, but she really wanted to be useful, so here you go, get some help. Hashirama beamed, pleased with himself, and immediately bowed, hastily avoiding the objections that arose, pushing Naruto, who was hesitating on the threshold, into his brother's office. This was not how she imagined helping to build a village. There was no sign of construction here. Only dust, parchment, and ink. And a thunderstorm. And they looked at her with such an unpleasant look from under their brows. Well, it's not surprising. A few days earlier, she sent Senju away. Rudely and far away. In the office, with her appearance, it was as if storm clouds had thickened, ready to stun with peals of thunder and flashes of lightning. How can I help you? Uzumaki was not stupid, she understood and felt that she was not welcome here. The feeling was mutual. With a sour face, she looked at her feet, complaining that Hashirama could not think of something better. Just leave, he said coldly, without taking his eyes off the documents. Naruto rolled her eyes. An obvious reaction. And without thinking twice, she turned around to leave the office and go in search of Hashirama, so that he would give her something more serious than being at Tobirama's beck and call, who did not want it. It seemed that she even heard his relieved sigh when she crossed the threshold with one foot, getting ready to obediently leave. But anyway, who am I to violate the orders of the likely future head of the village? Gods, no, she didn't want to, but some childish resentment made her change her mind in a matter of seconds and go back, closing the door. Tobirama's hand trembled. The brush left an impressive blot, and the hieroglyph blurred into something incomprehensible. He pressed his lips tightly together so as not to say something uncharacteristic for him. It was not right for him, always calm and cool, to be rude to impudent girls. So, how can I help you? Smiling broadly, she watched him try to remove the blot. Senju's right hand was still in plaster, so he tried to correct his mistake with his left hand a little awkwardly. And he wrote with his left hand. How multifunctional he was, though. Disappear, irritation was growing in his chest. At her, for causing a storm in him. At himself, for reacting to her like that. No, that won't do. She walked confidently to his desk and, leaning on its edge, bent down, hanging over the hunched Tobirama, gloating. Hashirama thinks that you need help. Hashirama won't lie, she insisted, almost demanding that he give her an adequate task, clearly glancing sideways at his right hand. It was getting worse and worse to breathe evenly. Naruto, as luck would have it, was inflaming him. That's how she is. Taking a deep breath and closing his eyes for a moment, he tried to push his indignation away in a miserable split second, so as not to give her grounds for further irritation of his person. And so she stands here, breathing almost down his neck, unnerving him. And yet everything had started so well, it seemed that they were on the same wavelength in their desire not to irritate each other. But it turned out that it was just his imagination. Dust it, Tobirama said calmly, finally correcting his inky mistake and thinking of something to do with the woman. He hadn't dusted this office for a long time. Some of the scrolls were already covered in an impressive layer. Dust it yourself, Naruto snorted, wrinkling her nose in some disdain. Not her level of task. Not hers. To dust. She was capable of more in her current physical condition. And she had experience in sorting through paperwork. Her unfulfilled dream of becoming Hokage was looming on the horizon, requiring grueling training. So she had some experience in bureaucratic work. I can't. He finally tore his gaze away from the parchment and measured her with a look that was degrading to her mental abilities, as well as his plastered hand from the tabletop. Naruto straightened up, pouted, but said nothing. He was right. He had a cast. The fracture was complicated, the arm couldn't recover, while she didn't even have a scar on her leg. They say it's true that everything heals on Uzumaki like a dog. Sighing heavily, she trudged off with a gloomy look for rags. Cleaning is cleaning. And then, Kagebushin no Jutsu, having folded the seals, she created a couple of clones under Tobirama's puzzled look. What? She grinned. In the company of her copies, she would wipe the dust in a couple of minutes. You have 10 minutes to come up with a new task for me. And Naruto, 3 of them, armed with rags, began to sweep dust from all sorts of surfaces with feigned zeal. Tobirama, clenching his teeth until they creaked, tried to concentrate on the document again, ignoring Naruto's vigorous activity. Oh, that's not why he came up with cloning. He had to give him credit. She didn't stoop to banal childishness, trying to be silent and less noticeable, but with her appearance. Tobirama's pathetic attempts to abstract himself finally succeeded. He continued to write a message to the official from the retinue of the daimyo of the Land of Fire, as a rag ran along the edge of the scroll. And again. And again. The brush in his hand threatened to crack in half, so hard he squeezed it. Your desk is also covered in dust. Uzumaki sang casually, and continued to sweep the non-existent dust from the work surface. He had long since swept all the dust away with the sleeves of his haori, and collected it with his plaster. Releasing the long-suffering brush from his hand, he grabbed Naruto by the wrist in a fit of uncontrollable anger. Hey! Uzumaki was indignant, looking dumbfounded at his long and thin fingers, tightly squeezing her limb. This action caused conflicting feelings in her. Tobirama yanked her towards himself, continuing to squeeze her hand, feeling with his fingertips how her pulse lost its rhythm in the face of the threat in his face. Don't interfere, Senju said crisply, unconsciously moving his thumb to the place where the pulse was more clearly felt. Her wrist was thin, and her skin was hot and smooth as silk. He, as if in a delirium, falling into some kind of oblivion, induced by the beating of her heart and the heat of her skin, stroked the pulsating vein. From the mental comparison and his actions, he blinked in surprise. Holy Kami! Tobirama pulled his palm away from hers too hastily, grabbed the wrist, and buried his face in the document, trying with all his might to achieve his former balance. The balance did not want to achieve it. Just tell me how I can really help Dust. This is nonsense. Naruto gave in. An uninvited blush filled her cheeks in spite of herself. She looked at her hand in shock, bewildered by what was happening. It was exciting and strange. Uzumaki, weighed down by her own feelings, took a step back from his desk, feeling awkward. Tobirama put his brush down and straightened up, tiredly massaging the bridge of his nose with his fingers. He was thinking hard about what to ask her to do so that she would disappear from his sight. Arrange the scrolls in alphabetical order. Senju remembered the estimates. There were about several hundred of them, and they were happily collecting dust in the corner of his office. Those ones over there. He pointed to the pile she needed. That's another matter. Naruto slammed down the clones who were diligently dusting the shelves with documentation, and hurried to retreat to the corner to the scrolls, nervously rubbing the itchy wrist of her hand that Tobirama had touched. He picked the right occupation for her. Uzumaki was buried in the scrolls in 5 minutes, quietly rustling the parchment. For a while, he even forgot about her presence. And then he was completely absorbed in the work, so much so that he stopped noticing the time. And Naruto, too. Hey, Tobirama! Naruto shook him by the shoulder, pulling him out of his thoughts. Can you hear me? Senju perked up, twitched his shoulder, throwing off her hand. I'm telling you, I laid out the scrolls. She extended her hand toward the wooden shelf where the documents lay in neat and tidy stacks. As if to say, look and admire how hard I tried. Ah, good. Tobirama blinked a couple of times, It felt like sand had been poured into his eyes, and his back began to ache mercilessly. All day long, sitting at his desk, answering officials, reading complaints, and then sorting through scrolls with missions, he thought about the scale of assessing the degree of danger of a mission. And he thought so much that he lost touch with reality, time after time moving the scrolls from place to place, repeatedly giving a description of this or that request. And now he quickly lost all interest in what was happening, plunging into work with his head. Slightly moving his shoulders and shaking his head, Tobirama tried unsuccessfully to stretch his stiff muscles. His spine crunched in protest. Uzumaki bent down, looking over his shoulder, reading the open scroll that Tobirama held in his hands, but looked through it. She became curious about what occupied all his attention so much that she did not immediately get through to him. "You may be free." Senju rolled up the scroll and moved it to the far right pile. And he took another one from the far left. There were missions that raised doubts. There were 6 stacks on his desk in total. But she was in no hurry to straighten up and leave the room with a sense of accomplishment. She was very interested in what the second was so concerned about. Both scrolls were with missions. Tobirama read this one too, and moved it to another stack. Senju was so abstracted that he did not pay attention to the fact that Naruto was practically breathing in his ear, continuing to stand behind him and meddle in his affairs. Tobirama twitched his shoulders, stretching his stiff neck, almost hitting his head on the temple of Naruto, who was leaning over next to him. At the moment, he cared little about her closeness. He had more serious problems. Naruto reached after him, taking a document from another stack. She glanced at it briefly and handed it back. "What's your problem?" She decided to clarify, although she realized that Senju was sitting and suffering over the systematization of missions. Now she could calmly help him by laying out a detailed device for ranking tasks in her time. But did he need to make this task easier? "More and more orders for hiring shinobi are coming in," he said tiredly, leaning back in his chair. And that's where the world converged. They were all different. By duration. By the balance of forces. By potential danger. Sorting them like that was stupid. As well as dividing them into dangerous and non-dangerous, at least to begin with. And as he got acquainted with them, he also tried to divide them into urgent and not so urgent. One evening of thinking clearly wouldn't be enough here. It was necessary to take into account all the nuances. Naruto reached for the scrolls, already brazenly familiarizing herself with the tasks. Senju simply watched, not interfering. Remembering that she not only had light hair, but could also have bright thoughts. True, not always, he chuckled to himself, remembering how a few days ago Uzumaki had dragged Kakuzu's head into his office. Naruto spent 15 minutes sorting, shuffling the scrolls and leaving 5 piles. The one on the far right had 1 scroll left, and the second on the left had multiplied by 1.5 times. 2 of the other 3 had 7 scrolls each, and next to the right pile there were only 3 scrolls. "Here," she said contentedly and stood behind him again, leaning her elbows on his chair. Senju quickly studied the piles. The first one, with 1 scroll, was indeed the most dangerous mission. The one next to it was less dangerous. The central one was the middle one. The other 2 had easy missions. Moreover, Tobirama would have weeded out the far left one altogether. Weeding gardens, looking for missing animals, chopping firewood, this is not really about shinobi. He hurried to put the scrolls away. "Hey, this is also a source of income." She intercepted the papers, not letting Senju throw them off the table. "A waste of resources," he objected coldly. "Also a source of income. Just don't send adult shinobi to do them." Naruto returned the documents to their place, insisting on her own. "Send the children who own chakra. They will gain experience and get deductions for the treasury," she suggested. That's also true, he fell behind the one on the far left. It was decided with her. But he didn't quite agree with the 2 after that. Escort from village to village. Even children can handle them. He began to sort through the scrolls from the second pile from the left. "Since we are talking about the younger generation, they can handle this." "Yes, really." Naruto was indignant, remembering how she, a 12-year-old, was sent to accompany Old Man Tazuna. They barely returned alive. Of course, he simply kept silent about all the nuances, but still. A dangerous time, and you want to send children out to wander the forests. You are not building a village for this, she muttered angrily. I killed a man for the first time at 7, Senju dumped the escort missions on household tasks. I sympathize that you had to go through this so early, she said sincerely. In her time, she studied the shinobi code of rules and learned to hold kunai and shuriken in her hands. It was immediately obvious that Hashirama's idea worked. But others do not have to suffer like this. She returned the scrolls to the second pile. Children can, leave the children alone, Uzumaki said in a commanding tone, interrupting Tobirama's arguments and slapping his hand, which was reaching out to return the scrolls to the neighboring pile. They've had enough because of your bloody wars. Let them weed the beds and enjoy the carefree childhood that you're trying so hard to provide them. Or have I misunderstood the message of this whole idea with the village? Okay, Senju agreed, but not without relief. Could they really afford not to throw away children? I'm satisfied with this sorting of tasks. Now distribute them among the shinobi, the Jinchuriki concluded with satisfaction, and decided that it was time to wrap things up. And with a sense of accomplishment, she headed for the exit, leaving the most difficult thing to Tobirama, correctly distributing the tasks among the ninja. Chapter 22. Senju reluctantly tore his gaze away when the office door slammed quietly, and Uzumaki Naruto's chakra burst into his sensory zone in bright colors. Hashirama asked me to tell you. The mountain of scrolls in Uzumaki's hands swayed menacingly. But she did it! She managed to walk from point A to point B without dropping a single scroll. And she even managed to squeeze through the door, opening it with her foot. Not much of an achievement, but in the current situation, this was the pinnacle of her accomplishments for the foreseeable future. Sakura, at least, had never dreamed of such a thing. When she was learning to walk like a hime, she would put a book, or even 2, on her head. It kept falling, hinting to the pink-haired kunoichi that she was a lousy princess. Haruna was furious. And Uzumaki had moved the shaky tower of documents on her first try, without dropping a single one. Tobirama looked with mournful humility at the enormous stack of papers that Naruto was holding up only by a miracle. No other way. The older brother shamelessly took advantage of the younger one. While his right arm was healing, Tobirama, in order to be useful, sat around in the residence, out of the kindness of his heart taking on part of the paperwork. But the word part was clearly understood as all. Sometimes it seemed that Tobirama was speaking a completely different language. And this is what he calls rehabilitation. The enormous batch of papers did not evoke the best feelings in him. Uzumaki herself was almost invisible. Only her legs and the ends of her long blonde hair. We were deceived, Naruto summed up joylessly. Because Hashirama sent her to rehabilitation too. But Naruto stubbornly did not go there. What was there to sit or lie down, when now she could do whatever her heart desired without a twinge of conscience? And sitting in one place forced her to think about the consequences of the black creature's death. The thoughts were heavy, gloomy, and brought on a murderous melancholy, squeezing tears from her eyes. Therefore, Naruto did not allow herself to hang around doing nothing, supposedly restoring her strength and improving her health. Senju grinned, allowing the corner of his lips to rise in a semblance of a smile. Today, he was not hostile to her. Tobirama hurried to get up from his seat. Naruto needed help. The stack of scrolls began to swing in the rhythm of the trembling of her hands, strained from the effort, and threatened to fall apart at any moment. But how could he help? He had only one working hand. It was a stupid decision. A very, very stupid one. But she did not need help. Naruto dropped the scrolls. They, mockingly jingling, scattered across the floor, rolling under the table and shelves, like mice hiding from a menacing cat. Well, well, she swallowed the curse, angrily looking at the documents rolling at her feet. Only a small part remained in her hands. Sit down, I'll collect them, she muttered, seeing that Tobirama had stood up. It was not right to distract the future second from his work with such nonsense. I was going to, but but I just couldn't crawl around on the floor collecting all this mess. But she didn't need to know that. Tobirama sat down on the chair again and immediately bent over the hospital project, calculating the estimate for its arrangement. What Hashirama had done in a hurry was only a temporary solution to the problem. And they desperately needed a hospital. Uzumaki crawled around the floor, collecting scrolls and putting them in one pile, sorting them along the way. It would clearly be easier for Tobirama to work with the documentation if they were already sorted at least by topic. Estimates to estimates, projects to projects, requests to requests, missions to missions. The scrolls that had rolled under Tobirama's desk, she had left for later. Somehow the thought of spinning around his feet made her feel hot. A little from embarrassment, and a lot from humiliation. Not only could she run into his knees or feet, but also into his caustic comments. Let Senju get them himself. Or, at worst, she would get them when he left. If he left. Because he looked as if he hadn't left the office since yesterday. As if Tobirama had sat there all night, hunched over documents, waging an unequal battle with paperwork. The version that he was glued to the chair was out of the question. He had gotten up from his seat a couple of minutes ago. What could you expect from him? A workaholic. It seemed like there had been a lull between them. Tobirama had stopped openly suspecting her, and she, in response, tried not to irritate him. Some semblance of peace suited her. Especially since she would be living here permanently now. Perhaps if they shared a couple more days like this at the dusty and monotonous work, then their relationship would become smooth, without nagging. A peaceful silence reigned in the office. Uzumaki was sorting papers, Senju was diligently poring over something, sometimes bending so much that his nose almost touched the table. They tried not to notice each other. Only Naruto often glanced in his direction, discreetly watching him. Senju was not distracted at all. He was much more occupied with the plan in front of his eyes. He already felt Naruto's presence at the chakra level. Tobirama simply resigned himself to the fact that Hashirama dumped both the scrolls and Naruto on him, who was eager to occupy herself with something, and clearly not with boring, dusty work. So they spent the entire daylight hours at the monotonous work. Senju had bent over and was still not straightening up, sacrificing his healthy back for the sake of work. Uzumaki, having sorted out the scrolls, took a brush, ink and paper, sat down on the floor near the window, throwing down questions for the shinobi survey to give the sketches to Tobirama. The shinobi ranking system clearly needed some work, if Senju had come up with it. When her legs went numb, she stood up and stretched them, walking around the office or squatting. When her back or neck went numb, she tried to massage the throbbing area with her hands, and again did simple exercises to warm up the tense muscles. Tobirama neglected this. As she noticed, it seemed that he did not even move. But no, look, he moved, stretching his neck, simply turning his head from side to side. At some point, she managed to notice how he winced when he finally straightened up. Uzumaki rolled her eyes. Workaholic. And then she felt so sorry for him. He worked here tirelessly, often in splendid isolation. And he was so absorbed in his work that he forgot about simple things. Taking the scroll with the outline of questions for the shinobi questionnaire, she approached his desk, placing the paper on the very edge. It seemed that the younger Senju did not notice her. Only it seemed so. Because he certainly could not have failed to notice. He simply did not attach any importance to her actions, just like before, when she poured him a glass of water, holding it under his arm. She got hold of a whole bag of apricots, honestly dividing this simple snack in half. She turned on the light when it began to get dark. Only now did Tobirama attach importance to her presence, because Naruto stood behind him and placed her palms on his tense shoulders. "What are you doing?" he asked reasonably. It seemed that this was already too much. "A favor." She sang slyly in his ear and began to knead the tense muscles of Tobirama's broad back, just like Haruno had taught her to do. Uzumaki, bogged down in her studies, buried in textbooks, chronicles and scrolls, began to suffer from back and neck pain. And when she pinched a nerve, she realized that she had to do something about it. Naruto found a solution almost immediately. She went to Sakura and asked her to teach her massage. Ryanin was surprised, but after listening to her complaints, she taught her shadow cloning, a newly acquired massage technique, and the enemy in the face of merciless osteochondrosis was defeated on the approach. I feel sorry for you. You seem like a smart guy, but you don't feel sorry for yourself. Her fingers confidently stroked the area of the neck, shoulders, and shoulder blades, warming up the muscles before the massage. Senju was almost speechless from what was happening. He honestly wanted to throw off her hands, roughly tell her far away and for a long time, and finish the job, but all his confidence was blown away like the wind, as soon as the girl's palms almost gently stroked him from the back of his head to his shoulder blades. Involuntarily, treacherous goosebumps ran after her hands. Relax, she ordered, feeling how his muscles were almost cramping from tension. It wouldn't take long to get a cramp like that. But such a reaction suited her. Tobirama could resist, or even slap her on the hands for her unheard-of impudence. Although impudence was good for him, indignation at what was happening beat in him to the last. He unsuccessfully grabbed onto his elusive composure, but the persistent persuasiveness of her skillful hands persuaded him to spit on everything. Closing his eyes, he relaxed a little, clinging with his mind to the mechanics of his movements, not allowing himself to dissolve completely and utterly under the onslaught of pleasant feelings and goosebumps scurrying back and forth. Now she was stroking along his spine, and now her palms were drawing circles in the area of his shoulder blades. A couple of pleasant, but not long moments, and with light movements they twisted spirals upward, to the back of his head, dispersing the blood through his veins. That's better, Naruto praised him, accompanying this with rhythmic and gentle movements of her hands and fingers, driving away the remnants of tension from his numb muscles. Don't you dare strangle me, he warned her, losing all threat in mid-sentence. Tobirama gradually relaxed his mind as well. He didn't trust her completely and utterly, but let her not think anything unnecessary. Otherwise, she was really trying to become his friend. And in a relaxed state, he can stop an attempt at murder by fighting back the attacker. Who do you think I am? And accompanied her insult with a painful pinch. You are Tobirama Senju, a mighty and renowned shinobi of the Senju clan. She showered his head with flattering epithets, buttering up not only his tense back, but also his inflated ego. And a crazy workaholic, she snorted, moving from simple stroking to more radical actions, starting to knead his neck, pressing from memory on all those magic points that Sakura had indicated in order to relieve the pain. Senju felt a hot shiver flowing down from the back of his head like molasses. Insidious fox. The pain retreated under the onslaught of a relaxing massage, giving way to pleasure. He didn't want to drive Naruto away. She had magic hands. Her care, even though it was forced upon his fair-haired head, evoked a feeling of gratitude. It was just that no one had cared for him like that for a long time. He himself had cared for his older brother. He had worried, been anxious, protected him, and then here you go. They praise, protect, do stupid and reckless things. However, it was very nice. Especially this episode and her hot and gentle hands fluttering over his back. Thoughts flew further and further away, leaving a soothing emptiness in his head. Tobirama, relaxing, closed his eyes, breathed deeply and evenly, enjoying the moment, drowning in it. Naruto, biting his lip, recalled the sequence of actions in his memory, concentratedly massaged, getting ready to finish the process. Tobirama relaxed enough. Enough is enough. With the pads of her fingers, she drummed on his neck, imitating large drops of rain, causing a noticeable tremor in him, which she felt with her own skin. This struck and hooked her so much that she, pleased with the effect produced, broke into a silly smile, delaying the end of the massage. Her actions became teasing, provocative. Ahem, am I disturbing you? A strange voice intruded into their strange idyll. Naruto and Tobirama shuddered in unison. Senju immediately opened his eyes, straightening up, moving away from the women's hands, and Uzumaki hastily removed her hands from his pale skin, hiding them behind her back and turning her gaze to the visitor. Anticipating your question, yes, I've been standing here for a minute already, said the dark-haired girl. I saw everything, she said meaningfully, narrowing her eyes slyly. Get to the point, Tobirama sternly interrupted her, feeling a blissful weakness in his body, while he put on his impeccable mask of coldness on his face. And the unexpected guest's caustic comments would definitely ruin his mood. PFF. She rolled her eyes and snorted dismissively. No matter how Tobirama tried to keep a straight face, she saw a lot. Can she listen to this? She looked behind him, examining the stranger with interest. She had never met such bright and remarkable girls before. What a motley company had formed in the village. Naruto, it's time for you to go. Involuntarily, soft notes slipped into his voice. It seemed like he ordered her to leave the office, but it seemed like he asked her. Okay, see you tomorrow. Uzumaki had no doubt that Hashirama would disown her, sending her to run errands with her younger brother again. She calmly walked out, not expressing her interest in any way. Whoever it was, the girl interested her. She was acting too familiarly in Tobirama's presence. And the news, whatever she brought, was too interesting, but the data obtained was clearly not for Uzumaki's ears, which was hinted to her, asking her to leave. Check out this. Lingering for a moment at the edge of the table, she pushed her notes about the questionnaire towards him, and hurried obediently to retreat. Hey, blonde! Before Naruto even crossed the threshold of the office, the stranger called out to her. Quite rudely and impolitely. Tobirama in the background sighed heavily and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked somehow doomed. Naruto turned around. Continue in the same spirit, and winked at her, breaking into a sly smile. Uzumaki realized that she did not understand anything, but Senju clearly did, and did not look very pleased with the brunette's statement. The mask of his calmness cracked. Naruto frowned, trying to understand what was going on, and left the office, closing the door. She definitely needed to meet this woman. Chapter 23. Tobirama was not sleeping. Toka brought him sad news. The land of wind and stone were building their own hidden villages, concentrating the bulk of their shinobi forces there. The construction was at different stages, but Konoha was still ahead on all fronts. Soon, each of the neighboring countries might come up with such an idea. And there would be competition in the mission market. And conflicts were inevitable on a different level. A more dangerous one, political. Attacks, provocations, sabotage were inevitable. Of course, before telling him about this, Toka spent a good 5 minutes finding out what connected Tobirama and Naruto. Who is she? Her eyes shone with curiosity. Toka, Senju warned. Not now. To his shame, he did not want to raise this topic. He experienced an unprecedented disappointment from meeting his cousin. She had been gone for a year. She had gone on reconnaissance, collecting information from neighboring countries. Sometimes she recruited small clans, inviting them to live in Konoha. He missed him and worried. But now these feelings were buried under carefully hidden awkwardness and a premonition that Toka would use what she saw and mock him. I want to know this right now. Who is this woman who almost brought you to ecstasy? She ignored his warning. No, she needed to know this now. Toka! The ice in his voice cracked traitorously, revealing irritation. He clenched his fists, trying to internally strangle a wave of anger that flared up for no apparent reason. Oh, she drawled meaningfully. Her eyes sparkled with joy. Her lips, painted with dark burgundy lipstick, were stretched into an ominous smile. As if she was planning something nasty. At such moments, Tobirama felt like a foundling. Not only did he not fit into the clan's genetic background with his appearance, but his older brother and sister, even though he was a cousin, sometimes behaved very carelessly and childishly. Okay, don't be angry. Toka took pity on her, noticing that her younger brother was angry. You probably should have come later so that blonde could properly relieve you of stress. She thought out loud, unable to resist and still provoking her brother even more. Otherwise, look how angry and tense you are. Forgive me, the sinner, for interrupting you and… Toka! Tobirama was seething. Report, he ordered coldly, driving away uncomfortable questions and caustic comments with all his authority. Okay. Toka Senju stopped clowning around, pulled herself together, and turning off the mode of a naughty cousin, switched to the mode of a hardworking and loyal kunoichi to the clan and country, gave the details of the mission. The detailed report took a lot of time. Toka left his office almost before dawn, leaving him alone with his own thoughts. It was also sad that Toka would now kill him because of what he had seen. She made that clear. Only Tobirama was more upset that they were interrupted. Naruto really did have magic hands. And she was also very caring. Unlike his relatives. The strange girl, whom he suspected at every step, expecting a knife in the back from her, turned out to be more compassionate and caring than he could have imagined. In this month, she had done more for him than Hashirama and Toka combined in the last couple of years. The degree of trust in her began to grow, and the antipathy was distorted, turning into sympathy. Oh gods! What was he thinking about? He had an unfinished village on the agenda, and now he also had a headache in the form of neighboring hidden villages that had adopted their idea. And he was thinking about the gentle and at the same time strong hands of a certain Naruto, kneading his numb back, and comparing her with his relatives. Having driven away the uninvited thoughts, he stared at the almost completely worked-out project of the hospital. But his head was empty. Not a single thought. And his eyes were already aching. And his back was starting to buzz again. It was time to wrap up work. He had already sat until dawn. His overloaded brain was melting, giving birth to strange thoughts. But it seemed that he was not destined to go home. Echoes of Madara's chakra pushed him away from this idea. Such a surge of energy did not bode well. Senju, feeling tense, rushed to the Uchiha quarter, to where the epicenter of the concentration of the red-eyed one's poisonous energy was. The last time Madara was so angry and furious was when Tobirama mortally wounded Izuna. So there was something to worry about. And Naruto lived right next to him. What if he got into trouble? Naruto meditated, hiding in the shade of the apricot trees. It was early morning, the sun had not yet thought of rising, and she was already on her feet. Uzumaki was having nightmares. About the future. How she would return to the black nowhere. Where, at the peak of her desperate hysteria in this all-consuming darkness, mocking her, 2 bright yellow moons rise, the color of the eyes of the late Kuro Zetsu. Waking up in a cold sweat, she stared at the ceiling, catching her breath, dabbing the tears that had swelled in her eyes with a thin blanket. A depressing state. But she was in no hurry to despair and give up. Her Konoha was not finished here. She could safely influence its formation without fear of the consequences. There was no turning back now. Someday she would learn to live with the thought that her past and future no longer existed. There was only this time. Here and now. She had saved thousands of lives. She had destroyed her own. And in pursuit, she clearly shook the universe. Here again her thoughts returned to the probable consequences of Zetsu's death. Her mood was rapidly falling down, breaking through the bottom, and the dam of her experiences again threatened to spill out into hysteria. At such moments, pulling herself together, she went into the garden, sat under the apricot trees, closed her eyes and meditated, inhaling the scent of ripe fruit and grass with her chest. This helped her finally come to her senses, calming her shattered nerves. And at the same time, she tried to reach Kurama. According to Murphy's Law, the demon was out of reach. Perhaps he was offended by her. For her unprecedented carelessness. She had already managed to be on the brink of life and death here twice. The last time she felt her demon was when she passed out after the battle with Kakuzu. And today, when her attempts were crowned with success and she looked with relief at the empty catacombs, eagerly trying to find her tailed one, she was thrown out. Someone else's key, a murderous aura spilling over the garden, touched her so much that she shuddered both internally and externally. Her instincts, sensing danger, screamed at her to hide in the nearest bushes, hiding from the threat that had spread through the air. Of course, Naruto did not run into the bushes, unlike the small rodents, alarmed by the emanations of evil. One particularly impudent mouse, beside itself with fear, ran across her knees, hiding in the folds of her black hakama. Having shaken the frightened rodent out of her clothes, she went to meet the threat, armed with a kunai and her own recklessness. The concentration of murderous ki was in the depths of the clan temple. Naruto hesitated uncertainly on the threshold of the Uchiha shrine, and nevertheless entered, guided by a not very good premonition. Her intuition led her to the altar, near which a secret door was open in the floor. Uzumaki, who had already defiled the holy of holies of the red-eyed clan with her presence, shamelessly darted into the gaping black opening. Someone else's anger and rage enveloped her completely, wrapping her in a cocoon of negativity. The fine hairs on her neck stood on end from such a burning and tangible concentration of ki. Naruto felt her way, stumbling from the tension and darkness that reigned here. And then a flickering light began to glimmer in the distance. Now she walked purposefully towards it, quickening her pace. Madara, more disheveled than usual, activated and deactivated his Sharingans, staring at the stone slab with such a maddened gaze that if it were alive, it would have burned to ashes 10 times over, dying in terrible agony. The tablet. That's right. Zetsu had somehow rewritten the tablet, distorting its contents to suit his own purposes. Sasuke had mentioned it once. And now, with the death of the black creature, the deception was revealed. You can't be here. Madara's voice was full of threat. In that short phrase, she felt all the dangerous subtext, as well as the order to get out of here while she was still alive, before a very, very angry Madara decided to rip off her arms and legs and gouge out her eyes, because her presence was insulting the shrine. Well, she saw him in a moment of weakness. Uzumaki was not stupid. She understood that Madara's world had collapsed. And he felt humiliated because he was deceived. And upset. Under his anger and rage, there was a broken man. Like a fool, he fell for what was contained in the lines of the stone tablet. He needed support. You'll scare the whole village. Naruto hid the kunai, but she was not going to indulge his order, nor follow the instructions of her mind. It doesn't matter. He growled menacingly, and clenched his jaws so that his teeth creaked. A new wave of anger washed over her, knocking the oxygen out of her chest. And there was also a whiff of heat. Madara was about to catch fire from his own anger. What happened? She asked softly and unobtrusively, sincerely worried. Uzumaki would not be Uzumaki if she left now. Here it was, a chance to drive a bone-chilling conversation through his brain, luring him over to the side of good, unless he killed her before she could even hint at it. The Uchiha, enraged, brought his chakra-filled fist down on the tablet. But it didn't even crack. It was definitely charmed. What a sacrilege to destroy sacred things! Uzumaki was indignant, wisely stepping aside, closer to the corridor from which she had come. Go for a walk, he roared, drooling, looking like a raging bear ready to tear its victim to pieces. His eyes were burning with a scarlet flame, and his soul was engulfed in the fire of anger. Uzumaki quickly left the room. She did not insist. And going out into the fresh air, she exhaled with relief, but did not leave the temple grounds. The back of her head was still tingling from Madara's out-of-control ki. Raising her head, she looked at the pale disk of the moon. Kaguya and the shell of the Jubi were imprisoned somewhere there. Her thoughts were immediately filled with heavy thoughts about what Madara would do next, since Black Zetsu's trick had dissipated. What to expect from the once again broken Uchiha. Her instincts did not allow her to think about this topic properly. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a creeping shadow that carefully hid its chakra and its presence in general. Although tried to feel anything else here behind Madara's chakra, Naruto felt something was wrong in her gut. Well-wishers do not sneak up on them like some kind of intruders, blending into the shadows. And this is definitely not a figment of her imagination. On alert, Uzumaki took a step back, hiding in the depths of the temple, taking out a kunai, crouched down, ready to meet the intruder. She would stand guard over Madara, so that no one would interfere with his grief. They had no use for corpses here. They had peace here after all. And she met the stranger, blocking his passage, waving her hand, in which the weapon was clenched. The attack was not fatal. Most likely, it was a warning of a threat. But the enemy did not dodge, immediately appearing before her in all his glory. Step back. Tobirama appeared next to her, ignoring the tip of the kunai that dug into his rib near his heart. The sting of the weapon was nothing compared to the sudden sting of resentment. His eyebrows were drawn together in a frowning crease on the bridge of his nose. His entire stately figure exuded tension. His gaze was directed over her shoulder, to where the source of chakra was felt more strongly. He immediately understood whose silhouette appeared in the doorway of the temple. Her presence was not a surprise, but it was an annoying fact. He experienced very conflicting feelings on this account. Tobirama? Naruto hastened to ease the pressure, but did not let go of the weapon. Unfortunately for her, it seemed that she would have to protect Madara's personal space from the younger Senju while he was experiencing severe shock. "What are you doing here?" The question was rhetorical. So, to distract attention. Tobirama was an amazing sensor. He could sense such a flash of chakra even if he was not in the village. What are you doing here? Who was she for him to dedicate her to his motives? Even if one of them was precisely her. Madara is furious. I went to check how serious it was. She took a deep breath, lowered the kunai, and hurried to hide it. No, she would not use a weapon against him. Don't bother him, and putting her hand on his shoulder, she gently pushed him towards the exit. To no avail. Senju was a stone. A piece of rock. Furious? Who was she to him that he wanted to take her by the shoulders and shake her hard to knock out all the carelessness that was stuffed into her bright head? Madara could have hurt her in the heat of his anger. Uchiha, with all the advantages of their all-seeing eyes, can sometimes be damn blind. Especially when they feel anger. He is upset, very upset. Don't ask the reason, she corrected herself. Madara was currently experiencing a whole range of emotions at the same time. Anger and rage were simply stronger and brighter. But disappointment and pain were hidden underneath. Uzumaki looked very serious and looked at Senju so piercingly and pleadingly that all his warlike mood was daring. All his icy composure cracked in front of her face, full of worry. Worries from Madara. Upset? He asked stupidly. Yes, upset. Catching the moment of Tobirama's confusion, Naruto squeezed his shoulders with both hands and tried to push. But he did not push. He stood as if he had grown into the stone floor. Then she applied more force, using the mass of her entire body. Biju take you, just get out of here already. She had already leaned her chest on his chest to push him out. Tobirama has no business sticking his nose into the Uchiha's affairs. Especially now. Otherwise, Madara will be covered with hatred. Then there will definitely be trouble. Under the current circumstances, Madara would finish them off in a couple of minutes before Hashirama would even realize that Madara was worth visiting, or else he really was too bloodthirsty. Madara is upset. It sounded absurd. Tobirama would have laughed, but Madara's ki was holding him down with tension and a premonition of danger. There was no time for fun. He looked down at the top of her head, which suddenly appeared under his nose. Uzumaki was diligently leaning on him with her whole body, trying to push him out of the corridor. He did not notice it because of his thoughts and the threat in the air. Holy Kami, Tobirama. Madara is a man, just like you. He may seem heartless, but he is not, and you should know that better than anyone. She raised her head, giving up on trying to move him, and tried to reach his heart. Despair began to clearly appear in her eyes. Struck by her words, he stepped back. Naruto, still clinging to him, lost her footing and almost fell. Senju, on pure reflexes, grabbed her with his good hand, helping her maintain her balance. This is who would lend him a helping hand so that he would not lose his footing. Her remark achieved a huge effect. It was then that Tobirama realized that behind all this murderous husk and powerful surges of power, there really was a bitter disappointment. Almost despair. Like when he mortally wounded Izuna. Okay, Tobirama gave in and took another step back, letting go of Naruto. Disappointment washed over him too. I'll believe you. And Senju turned on his heels and hurried away. Away from Naruto. And his own thoughts, When did this woman get to know them so well? Both him and Madara, Uchiha came out an hour later. By that time, her eye was twitching from his crazy energy and she had a migraine. Kurama probably felt it too, and was clearly cursing her with all his might. On top of everything else, her soul felt lousy. Because of Tobirama. She had enough time to wind herself up with this. You didn't see it, he said coldly, leaving the temple. Shaggy, pale, but no longer so angry and upset. His ki no longer spread in an overwhelming wave that frightened all living things within a kilometer radius. I didn't see it. Uzumaki agreed, taking a deep breath. The nervous tension caused by his anger was receding. What was wrong with that? She asked cautiously, not even expecting to hear an answer. Moreover, she could easily imagine what had upset the head of the Uchiha clan. Deception, he said contemptuously and hurried away. Naruto remained standing, leaning her back against the stonework of the temple, making a mental note that Madara needed to be watched closely now. The man had just lost the purpose of his entire life. And the Uchiha's psyche was so unstable that, having lost the meaning of one thing, they looked for it elsewhere. And usually it was worse than the previous one, if we recall Sasuke, who, having taken revenge on Itachi, and subsequently learning his brother's motives, decided to take revenge on Konoha as a whole. Uzumaki only hoped that nothing could be worse than the plan codenamed Tsukiyomi. But anything can happen in life.